this transportation. Notice it was aviation that rolled over to the TSA, taking over, and now it's the model to take over every other sector of transportation and the economy in general under InfraGard, under infrastructure protection of the TSA, with the DEA there stealing money out of your wallet as asset forfeiture seizure. Rodney Stitch could do 10 hours with us. I want him to just give us the basic overview today and then come back on in a few weeks for a full hour. Unfriendly Skies is history of aviation disasters, 1959-11. The following could be subjects to break down. The series of world record aviation disasters in the United States after the end of World War II. The crash in New York City on December 16, 1960, the world's worst. Salt Lake City crash and his heavy involvement. The reason why the FAA was called the Tombstone Agency. The practice of cover-ups by the political NTSB. And see, once they're corrupt, you can pull a 9/11. Examples: the life and death assessment given to him to halt the serious problems in airline having the most crashes. The web of intrigue that followed. Scandal behind the next world record airline disaster. The PSA airline plunging into San Diego and his role in that. The abandonment of the Federal Aviation Agency, where he worked. Scandal behind the bombing and prosecution of Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. Scandal behind the downing of TWA Flight 800. The scandal behind the hijackings of 9/11. Lawsuit against the FAA. Lawsuit against the NTSB. And why he wrote books on aviation disasters, 20 of them. Again, just we can't do justice today with him. He'll be back on the Nightly News. Rodney Stitch is an American author and former Federal Aviation Authority investigators. His work led him to understand there was major corruption at the heart of aviation business. He was in Iran when the CIA brought down the destabilization of Mohammad Mossadegh to start that whole thing. He joins us now. Rodney, thank you so much for coming on, sir. And, you know, in fact, I've got callers on hold. We'll just do the rest of the hour, and then I'll just have to go to calls tomorrow, or I'll go to overdrive. We'll see what happens, but we at least need 45 minutes. Sir, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Alex. That was quite a area you covered there.
Absolutely. Well, you're an amazing individual. Spend a few minutes telling us about yourself, your awakening, and we'll come back and dive into wherever you want to go first.
Well, let me just give you a quick rundown on my background here. I hate to show my age, but I was a naval aviator, a Navy patrol plane commander in World War II. Thereafter, I was a international airline captain, pretty much in all types of operations. And for the purpose of this show, what would be especially interesting is my time flying Muslim pilgrims from throughout the Middle East to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. And this is where I found myself into a CIA revolution, where I needed a machine gun escort take me and my co-pilot from the hotel out to our plane. And after that period of time, I went with the FAA, and this is at a time when airline disasters were a common event, sometimes every few months. And one of the major air disasters that was occurring was a DC-8 that crashed into the Brooklyn area of New York City. There was a big scandal behind that. Anyhow, the FAA, the safety segment, and we have the political segment too, you know. The safety segment sent me up to a politically powerful airline that was having a lot of crashes, including the one in New York City. And it was more or less life and death assignment. And it didn't take me long to discover the problems. And then I came under attack as I tried to correct them. And the attacks were from the political end of the FAA. And during these attacks, 3 more crashes occurred. And crashes are kind of horrific at times. So other inspectors said, look, Rod, you can't fight the system. But if I didn't do something, this would go on. So I did some very unusual things. First, I used the law in such a way that I acted as an independent prosecutor, and there were several weeks of court-like proceedings that followed. But the administrative law judge was simply an aviation ignorant attorney on the staff of the FAA administrator. So he covered up, and then the head of the FAA Sky Marshal program was so outraged by it, he urged me to send a report to the FAA administrator, and he would sign it, which was done. Of course, at this time now, this is a major scandal because we had a number of people die, and here I'm getting, here is all the evidence.
Aviation expert, aviation historian, Rodney Stitch, stay there. We're starting at the beginning to understand how aviation has become so incredibly corrupt. For those that don't know, he's an icon in aviation research. And more insane until your whole government collapses. And now look at the FAA today. I mean, famously corrupt. And I want to get into 9/11 with our guest. I want to get into, I mean, he's a famous guy. If you go research aviation disasters, one of the first investigators, World War II vet, pilot, you name it. So he's hired to go in there. Good people in the agency supported him. He'd gotten up to that point. Why were all these planes crashing routinely? And then we'll kind of do a condensed history of where it went during this segment. But then I want to get into 9/11 with our guest and ask where this is all going today. But the crew wants to know, before you finish up on that part, about the Japanese flag behind you, Rodney Stitch, WikiLeaksUSA.org.
Well, the Japanese flag is one that I recovered toward the end of the war. I was flying a four-engine privateer out of Tinian to a little island called Marcus Island, and I happened to find a flag there, so I brought it back. Incidentally, after the end of the war, I flew for a while for Japan Airlines, and many of my co-pilots were former Japanese wartime Navy pilots. So here we have the cockpit, and this is even before the peace treaty took effect, and I think it was 52. Here you have Japanese and American wartime pilots in the same cockpit. So it's kind of interesting, I thought.
But the Japanese were pretty honorable. I mean, once the war was over, they didn't generally double-cross, did they?
No, in some ways, I thought they were more honorable than some of the people I ran into in the U.S. government. And I think I even have mentioned that in some of my writings. Incidentally, the 20 books are on all areas of government corruption, based upon what I have, over a period of years, by writing books and being on hundreds of radio and television programs, starting back in 1978.
Oh, I know. I mean, I've read books from back in the 80s and stuff where it'll quote, Rodney Stitch. I mean, you've been involved. I should have introduced you as an icon of the liberty movement that a lot of young folks may not know who you are. I mean, what is your view about the planetary situation right now? Let's get a big, wide view, then we'll zoom into aviation. Who's taking over? What's happening? What's your view?
Well, that's an area you're far more qualified than I am, Alex. I've been sticking pretty much to the hardcore corruption that I and others have developed or discovered, and I leave it up to people like you to come up with an analysis of what is behind all this.
It's amazing. This is a short segment, long segment coming up, but let's get back to the point before the break. You're in there. You're the top federal investigator on some of these crashes. You write your reports. You're told basically shut up, but some other folks in the FAA, they support you. They sign the document. It gets sent to the full head of the FAA. Please continue.
Well, what happened then, I sent a letter to the FAA saying I refuse to work under these deadly conditions and I'm resigning. So I then returned to California, and I started writing books to inform the public of these things, because everywhere I went, well, I know during all these accidents when I was fighting the system, I notified a number of members of Congress, and this was in about 65. I did get one thing accomplished. They abandoned the Federal Aviation Agency, and then renamed it the Federal Aviation Administration, but it's the same personnel and the same culture. So the crashes continued for a number of years, and they eventually greatly reduced in frequency due to other conditions, improved engines and things like that. However, occasionally, like on 9/11, people don't realize the FAA did have a role in that. But anyhow, what started happening is that I started receiving information from former CIA people that were involved in like...
Hold on, we're going to come right back on that point. Rodney Stitch, WikiLeaksUSA.org. Talk about a hardcore investigator. He's at World War II vet. Stay with us. Is our guest, WikiLeaksUSA.org. He's the type of guy that we ought to just fly out to Austin sometime to be in studio. I mean, a World War II vet, combat vet, flying around during the Pacific during all that craziness. And then just a consummate whistleblower from the beginning. And then his book that I have read is simply amazing. Unfriendly Skies, his work on 9/11, scandal behind the hijackings of 9/11, TWA Flight 800. He was early on, said that was bull. Of course, it's come out that's bull. The FBI put journalists in prison that exposed it was a continuous rod warhead, and the rest of it. I had General Parton on, who developed the continuous rod warhead, the head of Air Force weapons development, before he then headed the entire Air Force. We've had multiple former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We've had top admirals, top generals, General Parton. I think about the amazing guests we've had on the show. It's just mind-blowing. We had the former technical head of the NSA, William Binney, on probably 10 times or more, including in studio. I'm not bragging. People keep saying, though, if this was going on in government, we'd hear about it. We do. It does come out. And the reason I'm saying the government's not our enemy is, as bad as the government is and overrun with corrupt interest, on average, people in government are more awake than the general public. Does that mean there aren't giant swaths of bad people in government? Absolutely, it's there. But again, why is Homeland Security saying they're worried about veterans? Because 9 times out of 10, when somebody's really fighting tyranny effectively, it's got to be 9 times out of 10, it's a veteran. Because they at least have some sense of duty, some sense of, even if the war they were in was wrong, or partially wrong, depending on which war, it doesn't matter. They're people that are willing to go fight. They're people that aren't cowards. They're people that believe in something. And believing in something is better than nothing in this world. I'm ranting. Okay, Rodney Stitch, you've got the floor as best I can. World War II vet, former FAA criminal investigator, in there trying to find out what's happening. You expose it. They refuse to change it, but change the name of the agency. WikiLeaksUSA.org. Of all these scandals you witnessed, the stuff you saw with the CIA, you said the CIA started to bring you information. You got cut off by the break. Continue there, and then let's segue into 9/11.
Okay, as I started to say, the publicity from appearing on shows and the books started about 20 or 30 years of people coming to me. These are FBI agents who were in key operations, especially in the Middle East, who would report to me, and we were talking back and forth for years about the CIA drug smuggling, October Surprise, Iran-Contra, how we were subverting different governments, and there were even a couple of mafia people. and eventually we'll probably get into one Mach